When
Sure.
I first went to Gobekli Tepe and talked to Klaus Schmidt, the excavator, who unfortunately has recently passed away, but I had an opportunity to spend 3 days walking around that site with Klaus Schmidt in 2013. And I said to him, what does it feel like to be the man who's discovered the site that's rewriting history? And he was very careful. He said, no, I prefer not to say it's rewriting history. I prefer to say it's adding a new chapter to history. That seems to me how mainstream archaeology is trying to finesse this.
Right.
That they still don't want their basic timeline, their basic story of human progress to be disturbed by this. They just want to fit it in to the existing model. I believe it won't fit into the existing model. It's going to overthrow everything. And the notion that the Great Sphinx might be vastly older than 2500 BC. Well, the argument of archaeology was, how could that be so? There is no other large-scale monument, which is 12,000 plus years old anywhere in the world. If there was a culture that could make the Sphinx 12,500 years ago, then surely it must have made other monuments as well. Well, suddenly we have that other monument. We have Gobekli Tepe, and it's not even very far from the Sphinx.
That's true.
So, it becomes, the whole notion that the Sphinx may be much older suddenly becomes much more credible than it was before. I think the second point which archaeologists are not taking into account, archaeologists tend to be uniformitarians. They don't really like cataclysms very much. And they don't, in my view, take enough account of the role of cataclysmic events in the story of human civilization. And again, there's new information and new evidence here. We now know it's really no longer in dispute that the Earth was hit by a fragmenting comet round about 12,980 years ago, give or take 5 years. Because when comets hit the Earth, they leave a signature in the chemistry of the Earth all over the planet. Nanodiamonds and iridium and platinum. There are remnants, and these have been preserved in the Greenland ice cores, and we can say for sure this event happened 12,980 years ago, give or take 5 years. And it initiated an episode that geologists have been aware of for a very long time, which they call the Younger Dryas. You see, 12,980 years ago, the Earth was coming out of the Ice Age. The Ice Age reached its maximum extent 21,300 years ago, approximately. And there began a gradual meltdown, not always gradual. There were some episodes of rapid flooding during that story, but it was a process of warming. And then suddenly, 12,980 years ago, for reasons that until recently it's not been possible to explain, the Earth was plunged back into a dramatic refreeze. Went back to colder than it had been at the coldest point of the Ice Age. And that's the episode that they call the Younger Dryas. And it lasts from 12,980 years ago, give or take 5 years, down to 11,600 years ago, when suddenly the cold lifts and the Earth resumes its warming process. You have roughly 1,600, 1,700 years of radical, unexplained deep freeze. We now know why that happened. It happened because of that comet, which fragmented. Its fragments hit many different parts of the Earth, but the greatest impact of all was in North America, and it was on the North American ice cap. That's why there isn't a crater, because the ice cap was best part of 1.5 miles to 2 miles deep. Okay, and that fragmenting comet smacked into the ice cap. The crater was made in ice, not in the body of the Earth, and that's why we don't see the crater today. The initial effect is dramatic large-scale flooding, because the ice cap is suddenly liquidized. There's a huge flooding event results from that, which leaves scars all over the North American landscape. And then enormous quantities of dust are thrown up into the upper atmosphere. These enshroud the Earth completely in a mantle of dust, which stops the sun's rays reaching the Earth. Then we go into the deep freeze, called the Younger Dryas, because the sun's warming effect on the Earth is no longer happening. And it takes 1,600 or so years for that dust mantle to disperse. It's possible that the Earth interacted again with fragments of that comet, and that may be part of why it ends rather suddenly about 11,600 years ago. And it's not an accident that 11,600 years ago, is exactly the period that Plato pointed to in the story of Atlantis, because he said that Atlantis was destroyed, submerged by a giant flood and earthquakes 9,000 years before the time of Solon. And 9,000 years, Solon is 600 BC, so that's 9,600 BC. That is 11,600 years ago.
Wow.
That is the end of the Younger Dryas. Now, how could Plato have made that up? You know, it connects perfectly. I think the biblical flood needs not to be seen in isolation. We need to understand that that is part of a global tradition of a cataclysmic flood. Often, by the way, accompanied by a radical deep freeze. If you look at the cataclysmic myths in Iran, for example, they don't speak so much of a flood, they speak more of a terrible freeze, a dragon that caused the world to freeze. And the Iranian Noah figure, who's called Yima, actually doesn't create an ark, he creates an underground sanctuary into which human beings go, where the seeds of all life are preserved. The same story is told all around the world, and with interestingly different angles on it. In some cases it's a flood, in some cases, as in the case of the Iranian myths, it's a deep freeze. And what we now know is that both things happened, that there was flooding and there was a deep freeze, and the biblical story of the flood is part of that global tradition, and it's well understood. There's been very good scholarship on this, that the biblical flood is genetically related to the Gilgamesh epic from Sumer, and really we're looking at one story told in a number of different ways. And there's another author whose work is overlooked but deserves to be paid attention to, and that is Flavio Barbiero, who's an Italian author, a very scholarly man, who actually published a book called Civilization Under the Ice. I can't say it in Italian. It was published in the Italian language. Civilization Under the Ice, back in 1973 or 74, way before the Flemats or me or anybody was working on this, suggesting that Antarctica might have been the site of Atlantis. And what's interesting about Flavio Barbiero's work is that he connects this to a comet impact. Flavio Barbiero is looking at pole shift or Earth crust displacement, but he is considering the process that sets the Earth crust displacement in motion. And what he suggests is that the Earth is hit a glancing blow by a huge astronomical object, by a large comet, and that imparts the momentum that sets the crust in motion, or that creates the pole shift. So he was very, very far ahead of his time in that. There is a history to these ideas, and it's important to recognize Flavio's part in that. I don't think that our civilization is very solidly founded. I think we could lose it all very rapidly. We are putting ourselves in danger in a number of ways, and one of those ways is the intense specialization of our civilization. That everybody is a specialist at something, but nobody knows how to do everything. You know, we're all very interdependent. We take so much for granted. There's food in the supermarkets, you know. Well, what does that all come down to? There's the concept called just in time with the delivery of food. We actually have about 3 days of food supplies in our cities. And if the supply line was cut, as it would be by a major cataclysm, you would have people starving in our cities within weeks, probably within days. It would be that bad, and you would then have riots. You would have massive civil disorder taking. Imagine an event that raises sea level overnight 30 feet, flooding every coastal city in the world. Would our civilization survive that? I don't think so. I don't think we have the psychic resources to survive that. I think we're psychically very fragile. We're all very comfortable in our lives. We are all interdependent on others. Very few of us actually know how to survive. There are people who take survival seriously and who would know how to survive. But it's very interesting if you look at the NASA satellite photos of the areas of the Earth that are lit up by electricity today. It's very beautiful. They call it the black marble, I think. You can see these wonderful, brightly lit areas, the United States, Europe, you know, India, also increasingly brightly lit. And then you can see other areas that are dark, like the Amazon rainforest, or like Central Africa, completely dark and almost no electricity showing at all. And these images are taken by us as a sign of the advancement and achievement of our technology, that we can light up the world. But what I would say is that it's the people who live in the dark areas, they're the ones who would survive a coming cataclysm, because they know how to live off the land. And we have forgotten that skill, by and large. So we're fragile. And secondly, we're impermanent in the nature of the structures that we make. How many of our skyscrapers would still be there in 10,000 years' time? I don't think many of them would be. And if this was accompanied by gigantic earthquakes, as it easily could be, by large-scale flooding, we could be wiped from the face of the earth in a blink of an eye. And we would become the next lost civilization.